On the planet Xerix, the royal palace stood tall, made of black crystal that sparkled under the twin suns inside the great hall. Nobles from across the galaxy gathered, whispering, watching, and waiting. A human was coming. His name was Ethan Cole, an ambassador from Earth. He walked alone into the palace. No guards, no weapons, only calm confidence on his face. His boots echoed on the shining floor as alien eyes followed him. High above, on a golden platform, sat the three royal daughters of King Roder Princess. Lyra, Princess Vexi, and Princess Solari. They were the pride of the Xerix Dominion. Powerful, beautiful, and feared, the sisters stared down at the human and began to laugh. "Look at him," Lyra whispered. "So small, so soft. Do you think he even knows how to fight?" Vexi smirked. Solari tilted her head. "He walks funny." Their laughter echoed through the hall. Some nobles chuckled, others stayed silent. But Ethan didn't stop. He didn't flinch. He simply kept walking toward the throne. King Rodera, tall and fearsome figure with silver horns and glowing red eyes, raised his hand. The hall fell silent. "You are the one Earth sent?" the king asked in a deep voice. Ethan bowed slightly. "Yes, your majesty. My name is Ethan Cole. I come in peace, and with an offer." The king's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak again, Lyra leaned forward and said loudly, "An offer? From a species that couldn't survive a single Xerix winter?" The hall laughed again. Ethan looked up at her. His voice remained calm. "You assume we are weak, because you see soft skin and no claws." Vexi stood up. "Are you not weak? Your kind only reached the stars a few centuries ago. We've ruled this quadrant for thousands of years." Ethan smiled. "And yet, here I am, standing before your throne, not begging, not kneeling." The hall went quiet again. King Roder stared at Ethan with curiosity. There was something in the human's voice strength, but not the kind they were used to. It was quiet, steady, and unshaken. Solari leaned closer to her sisters and whispered, "Why do I feel nervous?" Ethan looked at the king and said, "You asked if I have an offer? I do. Earth offers an alliance, not war, not surrender. We offer friendship, trade, and knowledge." The king did not respond. Instead, he turned to his daughters. "What do you think of this human?" he asked. Lyra stood tall. "He is proud, but pride fades when tested," Vexi added. "Let him face our trials. He'll break." Solari shrugged. "He's amusing, but harmless." The king nodded slowly. Then he looked down at Ethan and said, "You came to make peace, but were greeted with laughter. Do you still wish to stay?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, because I believe you laugh only because you do not understand what a human truly is." The king's eyes glowed brighter. "Very well. You will remain in the palace, and my daughters shall host you. They will show you our ways, our world, our strength." The sisters looked at each other, shocked. "Father, you cannot be serious," Lyra protested. "I am," the king said. "Let the daughters of Xerix learn, if their laughter is wisdom or arrogance." With that, he stood and left the hall. Ethan was led to his guest chambers. As he walked past the nobles, many stared in silence. Others whispered, "Does he even know what he's gotten into? He's going to die. Or worse, he might win one of them over in the royal chambers." The three sisters gathered. "This is insulting," Lyra said, pacing. "Father is testing us," Vexi replied. "We'll make sure this human is humiliated," Solari giggled. "Or maybe he surprises us." Lyra turned sharply. "You better not fall for that creature." "I won't," Solari said. "But it might be fun to play with him." Far across the palace, Ethan stood at the window of his room, staring at the alien city glowing under. The twin moons. He had read about the Xerix culture, their pride, their brutality. But he also knew something else. He knew the secret power of humans. Not strength, not speed, not weapons. It was something far older: resilience, and that was something the alien sisters would soon learn. The next morning, the royal dining hall was filled with golden light. Tall windows showed the alien sky-purple clouds and 3 rising suns. The long crystal table shimmered with strange fruits, sizzling meats, and floating cups of nectar. But The three royal sisters weren't smiling anymore. Princess Lyra sat stiffly, her arms crossed. Vexy chewed angrily. Solari just kept playing with her food. Across from them, Ethan sat quietly, eating a strange purple root like it was nothing. He didn't seem nervous, not even after being mocked the day before. Suddenly, the doors opened. King Rotter entered. His long black cape dragging behind him, his golden crown glowed, and his face was unreadable. He walked straight to the head of the table, then looked at his daughters. "You laughed at the human," said, his voice deep and cold. "You made fun of his kind, called them weak, fragile, and slow." Lyra glanced at Ethan, then said, "Because it's true." The king's eyes flared with light. "Is it?" The room went quiet, he continued. "Then I have a lesson for you." The sisters looked at him, confused. "You will each spend time with him," the king said. "You will test him, learn about him, and he will learn about you." "Why?" Vexy said sharply. "He's not worthy of our time, because you must understand what you mock." The king replied, "And because you must choose which one of you will marry him." The table froze. "What?" Lyra stood up. "You cannot be serious. I am your father and your king," he said. "You will obey, but he's human." Vexy shouted. Solari's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan sat still, his face unreadable. "Why would you do this?" Lyra asked, trembling with anger. The king looked at her slowly. "Because humans may soon become our allies, our enemies. I need to know what kind of creature I'm dealing with. I want one of my daughters by his side, not just for marriage, but for peace, for the future." Vexy narrowed her eyes. "So we are pawns in your political game?" "No," the king said. "You are warriors of this dominion, and I expect you to act like it." He turned to Ethan. "And you, human, do you accept this trial?" Ethan stood up, looked the king in the eyes, and nodded. "Yes, I accept. Then it is settled." The king said, "Each of my daughters will spend time with you. In the end, one will be chosen." He left the room, his footsteps echoing like thunder. The silence he left behind was thick. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice cold. "I don't care who he is. I'll break him. I'll outsmart him," Vexy said. "Make him beg to go home." Solari didn't speak, but her golden eyes glanced at Ethan. Curious and strange, Ethan finished his meal and stood up. "Let the games begin," he said calmly, and walked out. That afternoon, the royal court buzzed with rumors. "Did you hear? The king is forcing his daughters to marry the human. They say it's for peace." "I think it's madness. Maybe the human's more dangerous than he looks outside in the training yard." Lyra gathered her weapons, blades made of plasma, armor. Forged from meteor stone, she smiled coldly. "Let's see how long the human lasts." Inside the palace library, Vexy studied ancient puzzles and logic traps. She planned to test Ethan's mind. "Not his muscles. I'll make him look like a fool." "In front of the nobles," she said, and in her private garden, Solari sat under a floating tree, listening to the birds that sang in color instead of sound. She held a small painting of Earth in her hands, one she had secretly taken from the archives. "I wonder what it feels like to live on a world with oceans and blue skies," she whispered. Ethan stood alone in his room, looking at a glowing map of the Dominion. He knew this was more than a trial. It was a test of humanity, and he wouldn't fail. Not because he wanted to impress the king, but because three proud alien sisters had no idea what kind of man he truly was, and soon they would. Princess Lyra stood at the edge of the fireship's ramp, dressed in full battle armor. Her golden blade rested on her hip, and her sharp eyes were locked on the human. Ethan stepped onto the ramp wearing only a lightweight explorer suit. No weapons, no shield, just calm eyes and steady feet. "You don't even bring a knife?" Lyra asked, half amused, half annoyed. "I didn't know I needed one," Ethan replied with a small shrug. "You will?" she said, and turned, walking inside the ship. The guards watched silently as the ramp closed behind them. Some whispered, "She's taking him to Molteris. He won't survive that." Maybe that's the point. Molteris was a hunting moon, a burning wilderness covered in lava rivers, acid storms, and fire-breathing creatures. No outsider had ever returned alive inside. The ship, Ethan studied the planet on the screen, bright red, pulsing like a wound in space. Why here? He asked. Lyra didn't look at him. Because I want to see what you're made of. Not with talk, but with survival. Hours later, the ship landed with a hiss. Heat washed over them as the doors opened. Malteris was alive with danger. The ground cracked under their boots. Geysers shot fire into the air, and distant roars echoed in the smoky sky. Ethan followed Lyra without question. They walked for hours across rocks that glowed red. The air was dry and heavy. You can turn back now, Lyra said over her shoulder. No one will blame you, Ethan smiled faintly. That's not how humans work. She paused, looking at him for the first time. She saw something different, not weakness, but focus. They stopped at a cliff below them. A massive shadow moved in the lava river, a creature as long as 5 ships, scales like black stone, eyes glowing yellow. A pyre serpent, Lyra said. We're hunting it together? Ethan asked. No, she said, handing him a small heat blade. You go alone, I'll watch. Ethan took the blade and climbed down into the firelit canyon. For hours, Lyra watched from above. She expected screams, panic, or retreat, but there was none. Instead, Ethan moved quietly. He didn't attack the creature. He observed it, watched its path, learned its rhythm. Then, when the moment came, he leapt not with brute force, but with perfect timing. He stabbed the blade into a soft spot behind the serpent's eye, then rolled away as the beast thrashed in pain. The serpent hissed and collapsed into the lava, dead. Ethan climbed back up, burned, breathing hard, but alive. Lyra stared at him, stunned. You didn't just fight it, she said. You studied it. Fighting without understanding is just rage, Ethan replied. Humans survived Earth by thinking first. For the first time, Lyra was speechless. They built a small shelter that night, using emergency gear from the ship. A red storm was coming, and the temperature dropped sharply after sunset. Inside the shelter, Lyra sat across from him, still wearing her armor. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? Ethan asked. A weakling, soft and scared. Someone who would beg for mercy or try to impress me with lies, and now I see someone different, she admitted. Stronger than you look, smarter than you act, Ethan chuckled. Is that a compliment? Maybe, she said, then looked away. Silence hung between them, broken only by the distant rumble of lava and wind. Lyra looked at the small fire between them. When I was young, I was told humans were fragile. Now I think we misunderstood. You're not weak. You're patient, focused, stubborn, sometimes, Ethan said. But we can be dangerous too, when pushed. Lyra nodded slowly. Her fingers brushed the edge of her blade, then stopped. She stood and walked to the shelter entrance, staring out into the burning night. If you survive my sisters, she said without turning, you might actually survive us all. Ethan looked at her back, not as a princess, not as a warrior, but as a person, and somewhere deep in her proud alien heart. Something had begun to change. The palace library was quiet, wide, and filled with glowing scrolls, whispering crystals, and ancient books bound in alien leather. Floating screens displayed maps of galaxies, forgotten wars, and lost knowledge. Princess Vexi stood at the center of it all, her hands behind her back, her sharp green eyes scanning every detail of the room. Unlike her elder sister Lyra, Vexi didn't believe in brute strength. She believed in the mind, the sharpest weapon in the galaxy. When Ethan entered the library, she didn't greet him with a smile. Instead, she gestured toward a black crystal table where 3 strange puzzles floated in the air. These are the trials of thought, she said coldly. If you want to prove you belong in this palace, you will solve them. If not, you can go back to whatever rock humans crawl from. Ethan stepped closer, examining the puzzle's shapes that twisted in impossible angles, moving on their own, codes that changed with every blink. These look alive, he said. They are, Vexi replied. And they learn from your mind as you try to solve them. He raised a brow. Sounds like fun. She didn't laugh. The first puzzle began. It was a sphere with thousands of small pieces spinning around. Ethan sat down and studied it. Vexi watched closely, waiting for him to panic. to fail, but Ethan didn't rush. He didn't force the pieces. He watched, learned the rhythm, and slowly the sphere began to slow down. Moved one piece, then another, then a third. The puzzle clicked into place. First one done, he said. Softly, Vexy's eyes narrowed. She activated the second trial. A code spiral that changed every second. It required logic, memory, and intuition. Ethan stared at it, then smiled. You're testing how I think, not what I know. Exactly, Vexy. Replied, still expressionless, he worked silently. Fingers moving across the glowing symbols, rearranging patterns, waiting, then striking again. Vexy folded her arms. She had trained in this puzzle for years, and here was a human doing it in minutes. The second trial snapped into place. Vexy finally frowned. The third puzzle began to spin. This one was different. It didn't move or glow. Instead, it showed a memory, a scene from Ethan's past, a battlefield on Earth, rubble and smoke, people crying, soldiers running. Ethan stood among them. Younger, wounded, carrying a child in his arms, Vexy stepped back, surprised. This isn't just logic, Ethan said quietly. This is a test of the soul. She nodded slowly. Most fail here. They break when faced with their own pain. Ethan didn't. Look away. He watched the memory, every second of it. He didn't speak. Didn't cry. He let it play, then touched the final crystal. The puzzle faded, and the table glowed gold. You passed, Vexy said, almost whispering. Ethan looked at her. Was that what you wanted? For me to fail? No, she said, her voice softer. Now, I wanted to see if you were real. He tilted his head. And what do you see now? Vexy hesitated, a man who sees more than he says. A man who doesn't flinch when facing pain. Ethan didn't reply. He simply walked to the window and looked out over the gardens. Vexy followed, standing beside him. For a moment neither spoke. You confuse me, she finally said. Your kind builds weapons and destroys planets. Yet you also protect children and solve puzzles with care. Humans are full of contradictions, Ethan said. That's what makes us dangerous and worth knowing, Vexy's eyes studied his profile. There was no armor, no fire, no claws. And yet she felt more off balance than she ever had in a battlefield. You know, I'm still going to try to beat you, she said with a small smile. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Ethan replied. She turned away quickly, hiding the slight warmth on her face. As Ethan left the library, the guards outside looked confused. Did she smile at him? Impossible. She hates everyone. That night, Vexy sat alone in the dark, staring at the puzzle table. The trials reset, waiting for the next challenger. But she didn't start them again. Mind wasn't on the puzzles anymore. It was on a human who refused to break. And for the first time in her life, Vexy wasn't sure if winning was what she truly wanted. Princess Solari sat alone in her floating garden. The sky above her shimmered with blue fireflies and soft rings of light. Flowers swayed without wind, and glowing leaves sang songs only she could hear. She liked quiet places, places where she didn't have to act like a royal, or prove herself like Lyra and Vexy always did. In her hands, she held a small sketchpad drawings of animals, stars, strange planets she had never seen. And at the center of one page, a human, Ethan. She didn't know why she had drawn him. She had done it without thinking. The soft sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Ethan stood at the edge of her garden, unsure if he should enter. Your guards said you wanted to see me, he said. Solari nodded and smiled gently. Come in, but only if you like peace. Ethan stepped in, amazed by what he saw. It's beautiful here. He whispered, It's mine, she said proudly. I built it myself, not with machines, but with time and care. I don't like crowds or noise. I like things that grow slowly. Ethan walked beside her as they moved through glowing trees and singing. Vines, your sisters tested my strength and my mind, he said. What will you test? Solari looked at him with soft golden eyes. Your heart, Ethan blinked, unsure what she meant. You don't need to fight or solve puzzles to impress me, she said. I want to know who you really are. When no one is watching, they sat by a small pool of water that reflected the stars above. The silence was gentle, not awkward. "Do you miss your home?" she asked. "Sometimes," Ethan replied, "but Earth is always with me. The way I think, the way I feel, the way I care. Tell me about it." She said softly, and so he did. He spoke of rain falling on rooftops, the smell of baked bread, the sound of waves crashing against cliffs. He spoke of children running through fields, of music played on old wooden instruments, of laughter shared around warm fires. Solari listened without interrupting. Her fingers slowly traced the surface of the water. "It sounds soft," she said. "Not like here. Our world is sharp, loud, and cold." "Maybe that's why I was sent here," Ethan said. "To bring a little softness to a hard place." Solari looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "You are nothing like I expected," she said. "You don't push or pretend, you just are." Ethan chuckled. "Is that good or bad?" She smiled. "It's strange, and strange is interesting." They sat in silence again. But this time it felt like something was growing between them. Not fast, not loud, just slow and real. After a while, Solari stood up and walked to a small tree. From its branches hung glowing orbs, each one showing a memory. She picked one and held it in her hands. It showed her as a child, standing alone at a royal banquet while her sisters laughed with warriors and nobles. "I was always the quiet one," she said, "too soft, too gentle, too emotional. They thought I was weak. But my father said I had a different kind of strength." She handed the orb to Ethan. He watched the memory, then looked at her. "You're not weak, Solari," he said. "You just feel more deeply than others. That's not a flaw, it's a gift." Her cheeks flushed. She turned quickly and tried to hide her smile. "Why? Are you like this?" she asked, so kind, "even when we mocked you, even when we tried to break you?" "'Cause I don't see enemies," he said. "I see people who are afraid to understand something different." Solari walked beside him and looked up at the stars. "My sisters wanted to prove they were better than you," she said quietly. "But I just wanted to know you." Ethan looked down at her, his voice calm and true. "Then I'll show you." They stayed in the garden until the second moon rose. Solari gave him a small glowing flower. "This one only blooms for someone with a true heart," she said. "No alien has ever made it open." Ethan held it gently, and the flower slowly opened, releasing a warm light. Solari gasped, her eyes wide. "Maybe you really are the strange legend Father feared," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a man trying to be better." As he left the garden, Solari touched the drawing in her sketchbook again. Now she understood why she had drawn him. Because something inside her had already begun to bloom. The royal city of Xerix had never been this alive. Alien citizens flooded the crystal streets. Watching the giant sky screens above them, every screen showed the same strange image: Ethan Cole, the human, walking through palace halls beside the three royal daughters. At first they had laughed. A human in the palace? Just another weak creature from a soft planet. He'll be gone by sunset. But he didn't leave. He hunted beasts with Lyra and returned with fire in his eyes. He solved the ancient puzzles of Vexi's library, something no outsider had done before and now. He walked through Solari's glowing gardens like he belonged. People started to wonder, is he really just a man? Or is he something more? Maybe the king sees something we don't. Inside the palace, King Roder stood. At his throne, watching the screens, advisors stood near him, whispering. "Your daughters have changed," one said. "Yes," the king replied. "Not because I ordered them, but because the human revealed who they truly are." He turned to the royal steward, announced the final gathering. "Let the nobles, the citizens, and the stars themselves witness what comes next." That evening, the grand dome was filled with thousands of glowing aliens from every part of the Dominion. The ceiling above them opened, showing the twin moons and a blanket of stars. At the center stood a round platform made of light, and upon it stood Ethan Cole, surrounded by the three sisters Lyra, Vexi, and Solari. Each stood with a different expression. Lyra looked proud, her arms folded, but her eyes softer than before. Vexi stood calm, her hands behind her back, watching Ethan like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Solari stood closest to him, her fingers gently brushing the edge of his sleeve when no one was looking. King Rotor rose from his throne above the crowd. "The time has come," he declared. "My daughters mocked a visitor. They thought him weak. He proved otherwise." The crowd murmured in agreement. The king continued, "I gave them a command to know the human, to test him, to learn from him, and now—" His voice echoed across the dome. "They must decide which among them will stand by his side, not just in name, but in honor and unity." Gasps spread through the room. The final choice was not for the king to make. It was for the daughters. Lyra stepped forward first. She looked at Ethan, then spoke to the crowd. "I thought strength was only in battle," she said. "But he showed me that true strength is in patience, in courage, in kindness." She paused, then slowly stepped back. Vexy stepped forward next. "I believe the mind was the greatest weapon," she said. "But he solved more than puzzles. He solved pieces of me I didn't know were broken." She too stepped back. Now only Solari stood in front of Ethan. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the dome like wind through glass. "I never wanted to fight him or test him," she said. "I only wanted to understand him, and in doing so, I found someone who understands me." She looked at her father, her sisters, and finally at Ethan. "My heart chooses him." The crowd fell silent, then slowly began to cheer, not wild or loud, but warm, honest, real. King Rotor nodded with deep pride. "Then let it be known across every world, from this night forward, the house of Xerix and the people of Earth are united, not through conquest, but through choice." Ethan looked at Solari, then at Lyra and Vexy. "I didn't come here to win hearts or change fates," he said, "but somehow we've changed each other." He stepped beside Solari, and the dome glowed brighter than it ever had before. In the crowd, some aliens wept, others smiled. Few still whispered, "Maybe humans are dangerous, but maybe that's not always bad." That night, lights danced in the sky over Xerix. For the first time in history, a human stood beside alien royalty, not as a guest, not as a threat, but as family. And somewhere in the stars, both Earth and Xerix looked at each other differently, not as strangers, but as something new. The twin suns of Xerix rose slowly, casting golden light over the palace, but this morning felt different. The people in the city moved with purpose. Nobles whispered with curiosity, and soldiers stood straighter than usual inside the throne room. The floor had been polished to mirror shine. Banners of both Earth and Xerix now hung side by side, red and blue, woven together like one heartbeat. King Rotor sat silently on his throne, his face calm but thoughtful. He had ruled for many cycles, led armies, ended rebellions, and crushed invaders. But today, he would do something far greater, something no Xerix king had ever done before. He would name a human as part of his legacy. The room filled quickly. Nobles in long robes, warriors in ceremonial armor, scholars holding ancient scrolls. And even the common people gathered near the high windows, all eyes locked on the glowing platform in the center. Ethan Cole walked forward, dressed not in armor, but in a simple dark suit made from Xerix silk. His eyes were calm, steady, respectful. Beside him walked Princess Solari, her golden hair woven with starlight threads, her hand resting gently on Ethan's. Behind them stood Lyra and Vexy. Not as rivals, but as proud sisters, not of blood, but of something deeper. The king stood, his voice strong and clear. "Long ago, I taught my daughters that strength comes from victory, and wisdom from control," he said, "but I was wrong." The room fell silent, shocked by his words. "I was wrong because a human walked into my palace and taught me something we forgot," the king continued. "That true power lies in understanding, in patience, and in the choice to build instead of destroy." He turned to Ethan and Solari. "You were once mocked, laughed at, seen as nothing but a stranger from a weak world." Ethan said nothing, but the crowd shifted, remembering. "But you answered insult with dignity, fear with calm, and challenge with honor," the king said. "For that, I do not make you a guest, I name you kin." Gasps filled the room. He raised his arm and spoke with finality. "Ethan Cole of Earth, you are now bound to the house of Xerix, not by force, but by fire shared, trials faced, and love earned." Solari stepped forward and placed a glowing crest on Ethan's chest. a symbol of both worlds. From that moment, he was no longer just human. He was something new, something greater. The nobles bowed. One by one, the warriors saluted. The people outside cheered. Lyra smiled faintly. Proud Vexi gave him a respectful nod. And Solari looked at him with something even deeper than love trust, as the music rose and lights filled the air. The king walked toward Ethan and whispered, "You did not break my daughters," he said. "We helped them find their true selves." "That is what makes you worthy." Ethan bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "No." The king replied, "Call me father now." Outside, fireworks of energy painted the skies. Ships flew in formation. Every world in the Dominion received the message. Peace had come not from war, but from one human's quiet strength. And from that day forward, history books would no longer speak of humans as outsiders. They would speak of the man who walked alone into a palace of enemies and left with a kingdom at his side. Somewhere in the stars, on a quiet Earth night, a mother looked up at the sky and saw a new constellation, a symbol of Earth and Xerix bound together. She smiled and whispered, "That must be Ethan," and in the heart of the galaxy, in a palace once cold with pride, a human hand now held an alien. Together they walked into a future neither world could imagine alone. But united, they would change everything forever.